All right, this is the review for Legends of Arcane, Undead Book 1, and I thought I'd do something a little bit different this time. I thought I'd bring along Dynamo. Here he is.
Hello there.
He's I like to think of Dynamo as the flag bearer, and a synonym in English for flag is standard. So yeah, those were kept away from this campaign for the most part.
We will talk about standards a lot because we are bringing our standards close to this campaign for this
Very
review.
close, yeah. We have to examine it, right? We got to take a look at it. So neither of us really have notes. We just have a couple of things that individually we want to talk about. I'm sure there's going to be some overlap. When I did the orc review, I basically didn't talk about the orc campaign at all because it was the same thing as the human campaign in terms of the problems. This campaign, though, yes, it suffers from a lot of the same issues, especially in the macro missions. But those micro missions and some of the macro missions themselves were way more gimmicky and way more insane overall than I think the other campaigns were. Especially the one where we were literally inside the head of somebody and it was just this void. Like that was pretty psychotic. Not gonna lie there. And then you had the macro mission where you were just possessing ghosts. Is the 2 hour slog mission where I possessed a miner and that prevented me from winning. Very well tested. So that was a big problem too because of the fact that you had basically this lengthy amount of time invested in these maps that don't even behave by normal arcane rules, right? I guess the orc campaign at the end did have like a weird sort of out of left field sort of toss at you, right, with the invincible undead base that was never commented on. So it wasn't without any credence or precedent. It's just that it's very strange that basically every mission in the undead campaign has some sort of bizarre like component that I guess I would call a gimmick, but the problem is that the base gameplay loop is not really fleshed out that well in Arcane. That I don't even know what constitutes a gimmick and what constitutes a natural progression of its gameplay design. So it's tough to take a look at it the same way as you would like if somebody includes a hatchery that you hockey in StarCraft. Well, that's like a gimmick, right? Because like if that's how you're casting spells instead of just pushing a button on a command card, then that's definitely a gimmick. That's not the same thing as everything else in the game, that as all of the other gameplay patterns in the game. And so that's it's much easier in StarCraft custom content to take a look at that and immediately go for it. And even in most Warcraft 3 custom content, it's a lot easier to identify gimmicks. But Arcane is a special case because of the amount of time you spend away from the base game of Warcraft 3. It sort of distorts anything that would be a gimmick in other projects. It does count as a gimmick that I have to mass possess all of these units in that one mission. I guess I would say it does, but at the end of the day, it's still just the gameplay is actually not really that affected by the gimmick because you're still just slogging for 2 hours to finish a mission. So, what is your general take on these missions overall and as a body?
All right, so I will try to make a summary of the biggest issues that this campaign has.
Okay.
I was going to talk about the positive sides, but to be completely honest, I don't really know what to say in that regard.
I'm sure we'll have
But
like a small section
yeah,
in the middle or something
maybe
where we talk about
as we
some.
go on, we will try to comment on some of the positive sides of this campaign. But
Yeah.
so far, I'd say comparing it to the other two books that have already been played, as well as judging it on its own merits, first and foremost, I'd say this is probably been the most buggy of the three campaigns in terms of glitches, in terms of just blatantly untested shit. Let's just for a second put things into perspective. The other two campaigns, at least in part, were played on the hard difficulty. As far as I am aware, this one was played mainly on the normal
Yeah,
difficulty.
I don't think I played maybe the first mission on hard by accident or something. I don't really remember exactly which ones, but the majority of them were normal.
Well, that's the thing though. The missions in this campaign felt like the hard difficulty for the other two, which makes me suspect this one was even less tested than the other two. In general, it feels like whoever made the maps maybe tested them once using Who's Your Daddy, the cheat code, and
Mm-hmm.
then just never tested them again. That's just how it feels like, not only in terms of glitches, but also in terms of difficulty. So, just off the top of my head, some of the glitches we encountered included, aside for the obviously fucked animations and the, you remember the heal ability for the crack guy.
Yeah.
The fucking purple eye cancer thing. That alone, that in itself is just a glitch animation basically.
Well, there's no end to it, right? So I would say that
Yeah.
it's more than just like something that doesn't belong because of readability issues. It is something that is not finished blatantly.
Yeah. And that is just that is just an animation. In terms of actual level design, the very first mission we played, we won't get into all the single details for each mission because we already did that in the playthrough. But for example, that particular mission, we actually finished it without even completing the main objective.
Yep.
We destroyed the main orc base. The main objective required us to rescue, I think, 4 toenails or something. Yep. And we didn't do that. We skipped the final one. And it's just finished anyway. Which makes me think that the map was not really tested at all.
Yeah, because even if like
that's the first mission. That's the first impression.
Yeah, that's the first thing you do is like you see a base, you engage a base. I guess maybe the gameplay loop of Arkain is to wait until you're told to deal with the base or something. I don't know. It's weird.
Then there was the first tunnel mission, which had that insane glitch where if you didn't click on continue, you could not progress the campaign at all.
Yeah, that was pretty insane.
That was we needed to play the map 3 times in order to get past it, as if you were expected to play through this entire slog for 24 hours consecutively or something. It's just crazy.
Well, I think that most people probably were using saves when they played those micro missions, and just the macro missions in general. Whereas I was very, I just kept forgetting to use them. So.
And then there was the second tunnel mission, the one with the possessions.
Yes.
Which we spent like half an hour looking for the final enemy units, and we even ended up killing fucking random demons who are hidden behind trees for some reason. I really don't know. Why that's a common theme,
Yeah, they hide in the nooks and crannies of all of that.
And then hiding behind trees, that's just so fucking random to me. But yeah, we spent ages looking for that, and then we discovered we needed to kill the dwarf worker unit that we possessed.
Yeah.
So that's the issue with regards to glitches. These are things that ultimately completely break not only immersion but also any form of enjoyable gameplay you may have had. Even if the campaign was better, these glitches are pretty fucking major. So.
Well, they stop us from being able to progress, right?
You can really release a product that's like this. You need to test your own levels. And that brings us to the second point, which is the difficulty. Now, the difficulty here it ranges from completely ridiculously easy, such as the first level, I think it was the only naval mission actually, where there is basically no interaction aside for a few flying units that attack you.
Yes.
And that's the entirety of it. Besides that, there is nothing at all. You just have to amass a large fleet and destroy all enemy ships that are pre-placed and do not interact with you at all. So it ranges from that to the second tunnel mission with the possessions, where it was virtually unplayable due to the insane enemy spam and insane enemy abilities that allow them to spawn an army of skeletons that just basically overwhelm your entire force. Now, part of this, as we already talked about in the actual videos for the playthrough, originate from actual issues in the Warcraft 3 engine. For example, the fact that you cannot really have a functional naval combat using the AI is just not possible within the limitations of the engines, at least not without doing a lot of trigger work, which obviously was not done in this case. And then there's other limitations which could have been addressed, such as the upkeep system, which really completely fucks this campaign up. And as well as probably a lot of other things I'm not remembering, but ultimately most of the issues here did not really exist in the original Blizzard campaigns, and I'm guessing they are basically just original to this production. They are flaws, issues that are part of the maps themselves. So there's the issues that are part of Warcraft 3, and then there's the issues that are part of this production. And I think especially this later category is the worst offender by far. If that tunnel mission is probably the best example of not only a type of gameplay that is completely brain dead, in that it requires you to spam towers ad infinitum, never-ending spam of towers, but then even when you do attack the enemies, even when you do manage to defend your base, which I mean, there's in theory nothing wrong with building base defenses in RTS games. You just would not normally have to build 5 billion of them. But even when you attack the enemies, you need to spend 5 hours chipping away at their pre-placed defenses. So it's really just a slog. There is no real strategy involved. There is no real, macro gameplay. The enemies do not expand. The enemies do not use map control. They just spam their fucking overpowered heroes. Your heroes actually have to level up, but the enemy heroes always start at the highest level. That's already a problem. But they generally have a really unfair advantage when it comes to spells and when it comes to their abilities, as we already mentioned, the skeletal spam. So that's the second type of issue, which has to do with difficulty and balance. Then a third issue that is probably minor, but in my case, I always felt it was really stupid, is the fact that the campaign cannot really make up its mind with regards to what it expects from the player. This is especially evident when you watch the awful cringy cutscenes which tell you something, and then in the actual gameplay, it's the complete opposite of what you were told to do. For example, the fleet mission, the mission with the naval combat, says that we are supposed to wait until the human and orc fleets engage each other in combat. Then once that's done, we can clean up the remnants, which is actually what happened in the orc mission, which is like a copy-paste of the same mission. Because that's another thing.
The way that they did it was a little confusing, but basically the human mission, the humans beat back.
The briefing tells you to wait until the other two fleets destroy each other. But that never happens in gameplay. And what does happen is that the briefing tells you not to make a ruckus, not to make your presence known. But that is exactly what you do. You attack both of the enemy fleets and make your presence known from the very first minute of gameplay. So again, it's the complete opposite of what the mission expects you to do. And in the second tunnel mission, there's the same issue, where you are told that the reason you are controlling humans is that the Iron Fist or whatever it was that you were fighting, the dwarves and something, they did not need to know that Undead were planning to use this area. So they were possessing the humans in order to stage a fake insurrection, basically. So basically, they possess the humans to make the other human, the non-possessed humans, think that it is a rebellion within their own ranks, when in reality, it is the Undead causing all this. But the briefing tells you not to have your presence as Undead known, so that it looks like it's purely a work of humans. But the way the gameplay works is the very opposite of that. You basically spend your entire mission using banshees to possess enemy units in front of their enemy bases, which means everyone and their mothers, so that it was the Undead doing this all along.
Yeah, not to mention the giant walking skeleton that's just running around spamming like this gigantic purple effect on all of his units for some reason ad infinitum. That's really strange. I wonder what that means. That doesn't look like a human.
Yeah, so again, there is complete inconsistency between what the really cringy, poorly written, we already talked about this at length, briefings tell you to do, and then what actually happens in gameplay terms. And I think that's a big issue. I mean, I don't know if you have ever played a game called Marathon. It is a first-person shooter from 1994, which has actually a pretty involved cutscene, which you read through computer terminals that you access in the actual levels. And these computer terminals tell you of events that happen outside of the gameplay world. So to make this a little easier to explain, for example, you might be fighting on a ground planet, and in the computer terminals you are told of a space battle between spaceships that is happening above you. And you do not actually see this in gameplay, but you are informed it happens, you are told how it happens, and then how it ends, and how it influences the events that play out in the planet itself. Now, while generally you always want to you always want to tell a story via gameplay, the way this was done did not contradict what actually happened within gameplay itself. So the text, the briefing, the computer terminal in this case, what it told you did not contradict what actually happened within the gameplay. So if you really want to go this way, if you really want to expand the story, if you really want to give an explanation for the actions that are happening within the gameplay via text, that is fine, I guess. You can do that. But this is not what happened. It's like the briefings and the gameplay are two completely different games, basically. They do not really interact with each other in any meaningful way.
Yep. It
So
reminds
yeah,
me a
that,
lot of the Heart of the Swarm scene, where if you're playing you go into the ship where you're trying to, the prison ship where you're trying to rescue Raynor, and so the opening cutscene before you even, enter that mission, is something to the extent of a giant. You've got your Leviathan. This giant Zerg creature wraps its tentacles into the ship and like starts, penetrating it and holding it hostage, basically, like stopping it from being able to move. And you, so this happens, right? It's like obviously the Zerg are behind this, and then Kerrigan enters the area through a nidus, and like one of the tentacles is a nidus, I guess, or something. And so she enters the ship, and one of the Marines in game right after this cutscene says, "What was that?" And it's like, this is the same sort of thing. Yeah, it's Zerg here, and like it's obviously Zerg here. Like, look around. There's fucking tentacles everywhere. Your ship just got penetrated by them, and you don't recognize that. So like I shouldn't be seeing similarities to Heart of the Swarm in your Warcraft 3 custom campaign. That's all I'm saying.
fortunately, I don't really remember anything from Earth of the Swarm at all, even though I played all of it. It's like completely erased from my mind. Thankfully.
Yeah, that is.
I cannot say the same for Legends of Arkain, unfortunately.
Well, it's a blessing in disguise.
Very active, very clear in my thoughts. So, what were your main issues with the campaigns overall? I mentioned about three types of issues, which were, exactly, which were glitches, difficulty, and inconsistency in the briefings. What were, in your opinion, the things that struck out to you the most in terms of negative or positive as well? We can always talk about the positives if there are any.
Well, when they're this hard to come by, so I guess I'll talk about the stuff that I liked first. I liked the scale, in theory. I like the fact that there was an attempt to make a large-scale Warcraft 3 campaign, because there's not too many of those. And so I appreciated that. I also liked the fact that you had many characters, many sort of subplots going on. The problem is that both of these things, in which case I like in theory, in concept, they were not really delivered upon to the extent that we needed them to be, for them to be like proper additions to the game. And so what you have is a large-scale battle, but the way that it's executed, you have to, slog for 3 hours in order to finish a mission. And it's not that you are playing a skill testing map for 3 hours, right? It's not like you're playing a really long, drawn-out, large-scale melee game, like a team game or something in Warcraft 3, where you're doing like a 2v2, or even like one of those lopsided like 2v6 games or something, and somehow managing to hold your own. Like, it's not really the length of gameplay is not indicative of the skill it took to stay in the game for that long, either for the AI enemies, the AI allies, or yourself as a player. It's just, that's part of how the game is. And so it's not like, oh, that a player was playing really well if they got past a certain point in the game, because they outsmarted and outwitted the AI for 2 hours or something, and like it's an endurance test. It's not really like that. It's just, this is how it is. It is an endurance test insofar as, how long can you tolerate playing the same mission. But it's not really like a skill test. It's not like it takes skill to get there. It doesn't. It just takes endurance. It takes persistence. And that was what the main issue, I think, with me is, like, you spoke about bugs. Obviously, bugs are a pretty big issue, especially if they are stopping gameplay and stopping progression in the campaign. These are, like, really, really big ones. But those were more of a minority. Like, every mission suffered from some form of gameplay pacing issues. And it's always weird when you're trying to talk about something like this and you're saying, oh yeah, the difficulty was off, or like something related to difficulty balancing was off, because of course people who had an easier time with it or something like that, they might say, oh yeah, well, maybe you're just not as good as the target audience for this campaign. Maybe you're not as good as Warcraft 3 as you should be. And certainly I am pretty bad at the game, but again, it's not really skill based. The fact that I cleared the campaign means that it's obviously not, there's no like skill test at any point in the game that says if you fail this skill test you cannot progress. Otherwise, I would have failed a long time ago. I would have had to spend a lot more time targeting solutions for a particular mission. Whereas, really all it amounts to is spamming out some composition of units that can get you away from the enemy and clear the enemy bases, and eventually doing that, clearing the enemy bases. And it takes a long time. And so, really, the biggest issue that I had with this campaign was its slog factor. It's the fact that you were just playing just to play. You were participating in Arkain. That was what you were doing. You weren't really doing anything that was competing for your time. You weren't doing anything that was actually competitive in nature by the design of the game. It's not like, again, it wasn't challenging. The AI wasn't really doing anything to cement themselves, so the storytelling was all off by default. The fact that they're doing all of this crazy shit by having a bunch of pre-play stuff and then never rebuilding it that much and all that other stuff. Hold on one second. All right,
Okay.
So we're back. I had to get up for a sec. Here we are. We're back. Go ahead.
All right.
Say your piece.
So, among the things you talk about, you said how the battles being large scale is a good thing. While I will agree to that in theory, at the same time, I cannot really say this is a good thing about the campaign. For one thing, we already played the other two, and the other two also feature large scale battles. In fact, even bigger in scale than the ones in this campaign, I think. And we said that it is good that someone is doing that in a Warcraft 3 engine, which is mostly known for its RPG modes. But the large-scale missions in this campaign do not show really any improvements whatsoever over the human ones, for example, which were only good as a concept. They were only good in theory, not in actual execution. So the fact that there are large-scale battles was a nice change of pace for the human book. Maybe it was again a nice change of pace for the orc book, but by the Undead book, frankly, I'm just fucking tired of it, because it just means you have to spend about 2 more hours chipping away at pre-placed defenses. If the maps had been shorter, they probably would have been a lot more enjoyable in this case. So I'm really not sure we can say that large scale battles being a good thing applies to this campaign as well. I just think the human and orc campaigns basically shocked us in that Warcraft 3 is mostly known for its RPG modes, so it was something different. But at this point, it just feels like the same old shit all over again. It doesn't really have the advantage of being fresh anymore in this context.
So I will say that criticism is true of the orc book, because again, nothing changed, right? The gameplay is not truly different in that respect. There's no change really. Between you look at the human book, you look at the orc book, you're still doing the same stuff. The maps are constructed the same way. Some of them are copy pasted from the human book. So obviously there's not a whole lot of a difference between the two campaigns in construction. And so one of the things I said in the orc book review is that if you enjoyed the human book and you weren't looking for an improvement in the formula of Arkain, you might like the orc book. The same thing is sort of true for the Undead book, except there are more gimmicks, like we talked about at the beginning. And so I'm actually not even sure that I can recommend it on the same basis. But I see the caveat you're making is that it's sort of the same thing I was trying to hint at before I got interrupted and had to leave, is that the overall construction of the Undead book means that the large scale is actually more of a negative, because if these missions ended sooner, there would have been less suffering, and the pacing would have been more intact. Whereas, the fact that it is large scale, in this case, the execution is so wildly off course, off the mark, that it becomes Todd. That's a deep lore joke. Nobody's going to get that. Basically, you're just in a situation where you have no real construction of the large-scale RTS missions in a way that benefits RTS gameplay. It doesn't really benefit RTS gameplay. Like, technically, we're playing an RTS because we're mining resources and we are massing up units to attack an enemy. And we are sometimes getting attacked by that enemy. But the enemy doesn't... Money is no object for the enemy. The resources we're harvesting will never run out. The units we're massing, we actually are punished economically for getting... because of upkeep, whereas our enemy is not, because money is no object to them. Our enemy starts out at the best they will ever be, strength-wise and map control-wise, and are then whittled away. So, there's all of these abstractions, all of these like Arkain is RTS gameplay asterisk 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 because you have to like put all of these footnotes at the bottom of what you mean by RTS gameplay because there's all these different things that were changed from the formula of Warcraft 3 Melee or hero items and stuff like clearing out quote unquote creep camps of demons and getting a scroll of restoration and crazy shit like that. It's just there's like all sorts of weird stuff in that respect that
like has been mentioned. Like it has been mentioned, some of the issues are ultimately originating from Warcraft 3 itself. But yeah, like you were saying, some of these issues are just ultimately related to the actual map design. That's really the gist of it, I think. It's just the way the maps were designed. Both the micro maps and the macro maps, not only they do not show any improvements over the other two books, I mean, it's pretty normal, I think, that as you grow as a modder, as a map designer, I don't know if the author of this already released any campaigns beforehand, but generally you will learn a lot of stuff as you go in terms of what works best. That is exactly the opposite of what we have seen.
Well, I feel like again, I'm not super well acquainted with the development of Arkain, but to me it feels more like Shardundred figured out how to make campaigns faster as opposed to better, and that was the way that he improved. And like, yeah, that is an improvement in the sense that you can make more content in less time, but it's not really an improvement of the content's quality itself. Just the quality of existing is now true for it. You know what I mean? So it's not really the same thing. And that really is that's what I take from playing these, is that, this one it feels more rushed because of all the bugs and because it's so wildly different not really wildly, but different in construction. It feels like maybe some things that would have been phased out with more testing are, somehow related to the construction of it. Like, if there was more testing, if there's more time spent in development, some things that are here wouldn't be here. Some things that aren't here would be here. And I mean that more so than just bugs. I also mean like construction of the levels themselves. I don't think that possession as a gimmick would have made it in. There's a lot of things that I don't think would have made the cut. You know what I mean? And so it's impossible to know. Of course, we're playing What If, but it really just I wasn't expecting anything markedly removed or significantly removed from the original Arkain formula in the Undead book, and I got something that was actually different with the gimmicks and the bugs, but not in the way that I wanted, and not in a way that was a meaningful improvement to the underlying systems of what Arkain is. And so, I guess we may very well see a significant jump in the human book, because as I understand, that is more of a gap in that. Compared to the
second human book?
Yeah, the second human book is what I've been told is that it's more different than, the Undead book is to the Orc book or something like that.
Well, you will be in for a disappointment.
Well, I already knew that. Well, I don't know, man. It's rough. You don't want to poison the well. You don't want to start off with a negative sort of... You want to come in as objective as possible. You don't want to be negatively looking at the campaign before you even experience it. You want to give it the benefit of the doubt.
I think it's like Flame Knives and Eon of the Oak, though. When you started playing Eon of the Oak, you already knew what you were getting yourself into. So,
yeah, I mean that is true.
You approached Flame Knives with an open mind. I mean, I've watched your entire playthroughs for both of those campaigns, and for the very first mission of Flame Knives, you were trying to be as positive as you could. But then once the fucking insanity started, you just lost it.
Yeah.
And when you actually approach the Eon of the Oak, although I still think it is the better production overall, but besides that, when you approach it, you already knew from the briefing what you were getting yourself into. So, I mean, it is true that it is very important to remain as objective and positive even as possible, because ultimately, we're not trying necessarily to criticize things for the sake of criticism. We're just trying to offer constructive critique. We're trying to offer ways in which these things could be improved, and especially offer ways in which future creators, or even the same creator, depending on the attitude, they could use this information to make better projects. They could use the information to make better map design. So ultimately, when it comes to Arkain, I think the same design philosophy, I guess you could say, permeates the entire project from the first book to the last one. I don't know if it will maybe change after the second Orc book or something. That remains to be seen. But really, we are talking about the Undead book, but most of the flaws are shared between the three. It's just that this particular book was more glitchy and even less balanced than the other two, which simply leads me to believe that it was not tested as much. That's really my conclusion regarding the Undead book in particular.
Yeah, so I mean, it's really more of the same with some things that make it stand out, like the gimmicks and the bugs, and some things that you wish just weren't there, like that naval mission. I'm pretty sure I fell asleep in that mission. I don't remember much about it. I just remember slowly A-moving a bunch of static ships that were supposed to be fighting each other and weren't. They were just sitting there. Oh, man.
Well, you got attacked by some fucking spawned demon units.
Yeah, nether dragons, dude. Why? Why was that like that? Seriously, what is the point? Why do you have this naval mission to get attacked by air units?
I think in terms of insanity, this campaign was actually probably one of the craziest I've ever seen. Way worse than Flame Knights, for example. There's the mission in which you have to get into some guy's head.
Yeah, that is pretty out there, man. That was like Shardundred was on some psilocybin or something. He's like, oh, the enemy of my enemy is in my head. And then he makes a mission inside his own skull. There's like smoke everywhere from all the weed, you know, brain damage from all the booze.
It's so fucking cringy, really. Why would you do that?
Listen, I actually have no problem with those weird settings for RTS missions. It's just that it wasn't an RTS mission. Now imagine if, for a second, if we had to build a base on his head, and imagine if we were building a base in his head. We were like spreading our roots of evil, and unshackling,
spreading the void.
Yeah, spreading the void, unshackling his hatred and his sins. You know, that's like an okay premise, I guess. It's pretty zany. But I'd be interested in that. I'm more interested in a macro mission inside some dude's head than I am a macro mission on Arkain itself. So that just shows you everything you need to know about this fucking production. So,
but I think a particular mention has to go to the very final mission. The one where there's a billion demon units being spawned in. That mission is probably the worst mission in the history of Arkain so far.
That is pretty bad. It's like, it kind of reminds me of the idea of, like, you know how your last mission, you should go out with a bang, there's a climax. It's like, Arkain, instead of telling a story about whatever it's supposed to be about, it's actually a meta story about shitty RTS campaigns that aren't even really RTS campaigns. And this one was like, the climax in that case is the worst mission. And that's that's what they did. That's what it feels like, man. Oh, and then keep your standards away from Arkain. I mean, it just doesn't get any better.
For that final mission, you are given an AI ally, without which you are completely fucked due to the insane spam of enemy units that occurs. But even if you do this correctly, you will notice, for example, that the allied AI has a bunch of heroes. You know, like the Vanessa girl, I think.
Yeah, they're heroes that we used in the past. Maybe not Vanessa, but we used all of the others.
She's actually featured in the cutscene, but then she just stands there. She does nothing in the actual mission, nothing at all. She just stands there and looks at the battle. Maybe if there was another hero as well, I think. Maybe if the heroes had been used, that would have been much better. At least in terms of difficulty.
Well, it would have felt like an actual ending, too, because, like, the big ending where all of the heroes that you've used, and some of them that you haven't used, like Vanessa, are coming back to fight. You know, instead we got Crack and his fucking gang of addicts. Like, there's not even a full retinue of heroes that we're using. And also the fact, I mean, at that point, you know that Shardundred wanted that to be a micro mission. You know he had no desire to make that a macro map, because there is no macro. You just spam out some dragons later on, and then
there's also the fact there's also the fact that the triggers for the other battle that occurs on the same map, you know, between the orcs and humans, that appears to be completely fucking busted too. At least.
Oh yeah, that's right. They just stop attacking after a certain point, even though they're still alive. And we have permanent shared vision. That's such a weird mission. You know, like I thought about what I would do differently in that case. Like if I wanted an AI versus AI battle to be happening at the same time and be pertinent to the story, I think I would try to find some way to make it so that you actually had to scout and find out what was going on with shades or something. Obviously, you don't have the luxury of airborne shades or anything like that. That would actually be a cloaked scouting unit, like an observer in StarCraft, or one of those scouting drones. They weren't cloaked, but the scouting drone from the dwarf mission in the Human Book was sort of like would fill that sort of role. Yeah, I would have tried to make it so that you could interact with that, but instead, I mean, the only way you could is if you used those dragons and gargoyles or something. There was no transport or anything, so it's not like you could, use a zeppelin to drop your heroes over or something like that. This campaign also, I think, as a final little aside, really exposed Arkain's setting for the Warcraft 3 copycat that it is, where they had Nerubians, a proper noun in Warcraft 3. They had there's something else that I don't remember. They obviously all of the the unit responses where they're like for the Lich King and stuff like that. It's
for the Lich King is actually used by one of the human heroes as well, which is just hilarious to me.
Amazing. It's just it doesn't stop, man. It just gets more and more funny.
I don't necessarily mind the idea of making a copycat of Warcraft 3 because honestly, the default Blizzard lore is just fucking terrible. You might as well try to make your own and just ignore what Blizzard has said. But yeah, the complete lack of voice acting is definitely noticeable. At least it would probably be a lot less noticeable if the briefings were a lot shorter. For one thing. For example, look at a project like Mental Omega, just to make an example. It doesn't really have that much text in general, just as pre-map briefings and not much text after that. So the lack of voice acting really doesn't impact it as much as it would for a campaign like this, where like Flame Knives, there's endless dialogue, and none of it is voice acted. None of the heroes are what you think they are. So there's this human hero who is Gardon Bloodclaw, right? And
don't say his name.
He's like this badass commander in fucking black armor for some reason. Was like high on cocaine all the time, as you can see by looking at his portrait.
His fucking eyes.
But then when you actually control him, he says for the Lich King. And it's like, what the fuck?
Yeah, they just gave him a Death Knight or some. I don't remember what his unit responses were, but they were pretty.
It's probably the Death Knight.
Yeah. So the thing is, like, Warcraft 3 has sound sets instead of individual lines that you can give them. I don't remember how that was worked around. I do remember that I think somebody I know was working on an RPG, and they had a trigger system for the lines. Unit is issued an order, play sound between whatever, and like that was kind of weird. Obviously, that was not really what you want to have to do. And that was also in an RPG context, so I don't know if it would work in an RTS. I don't know how those triggers ended up working out. But I've done it myself before a long time ago. I don't remember how I did it, but there are ways to just import custom sounds and make your own sound sets. I think you have to obey.
Yeah, I've done it myself actually.
Okay,
it's not really that hard.
So you have to obey.
Where you basically, so the way it works is this: there's a bunch of lines. There is the select lines, the move lines, the attack lines, and so on. It actually works the same ways as I think Red Alert 2 modding, for example. So it's the same basic idea. And each of these lines has a set of voice clips associated with them, where every time you tell a unit to move, it basically picks a random selection among the provided audio files. So in the move lines, there's like 6 audio files maybe, one of which would be for the Lich King. Like, maybe you don't want to record an entire new voice set for your hero, but it's not really hard to just take that one file so that he doesn't mention the Lich King's name. That's really takes like 10 seconds at most. So really, there's no excuse. It's just laziness.
Well, I mean, maybe he doesn't have the sound sets or the sound files that he wants, but you can even just take other lines or remove the offending lines that reference proper nouns that are not in your setting, like the Lich King. You know what I mean? Like, people have done that before. Like, there was a campaign I played for Brood War a while ago where they used Kerrigan, and Kerrigan has a line where she says, like, this is Kerrigan or whatever. I don't remember what she says. She says something where she references her name, same way Jim Raynor does. And what they did was they went and found. I think they used a pissed off line, or they went and found a line in the campaign and like kit bashed something together where it wasn't saying that, because that wasn't Kerrigan, but it was using Kerrigan's sound set and Kerrigan's portrait or something like that. And so they didn't have the custom voice acting for that, but they were able to find something very basic, one line to replace that, and that was way better because then you didn't click on her and have her say the wrong name. You know what I mean? So it's like, that's just a basic example of, I think, a nice little microcosm of all of the laziness that, you could just swap the stuff out. But there are still really underlying issues, very, very pervasive issues with the construction of Arkain. And unfortunately, I don't have any confidence that they will be fixed in the human book. But like you said, I will be trying to be as objective and open-minded as possible, and looking for the positives until it invariably breaks me. So I think, that's basically all I have to say. I don't know when we'll be doing the Human Book 2. I might wait until the Orc and Undead Book 2 are released, if they in fact do end up getting released, so that I could just play them as the set of 3 that they were meant to be. But we will see. And we'll find out. Maybe Shardundred will say, after the end of the Orc book, I'm retiring for a 5th time, and then he'll come back like 6 months later, and just that cycle is like the Xel'Naga's, infinite.
Yeah. So yeah, in conclusion, I don't really have much else to say other than the fact I at least hope the new human book is going to be less glitchy. It's going to have less issues that prevent you from actually progressing in the missions. That is my one expectation for it, basically. But yeah. That's pretty much it. This concludes the unholy first trilogy of books. And we can always look forward to the actual books being written by the same guy. I hope.
We will be doing a live reading if they ever come out.
Yeah, exactly.
What did I just agree to? Fuck!